Welcome to Get on My Corner, the show where we uncover the corners of our world where history was made and the inventions that shaped our lives first took root.
Today we're on a corner that gave birth to one of the most important inventions of the 20th century, and some would even argue one of the most important inventions of all time. And I'm not just talking about the ShamWow. No, I'm talking about that little thing you're using to watch our show, television. And even if you're watching us on some other type of screen, it all goes back to the day that television was invented.
Before there was Netflix, before there was reality shows, before there was 500 different channels with nothing on to watch, except for one amazingly fun and informational history show with two handsome hosts, there was one young, seriously young man in one lab with one big idea, and his name was Philo Farnsworth. Now, if Farnsworth sounds familiar to you, then that might be because you're a fan of Futurama, where they named the doctor after Philo.
Forget Hollywood. Philo was just a teenager living in Utah when he dreamt of a way to transmit the moving picture through the air. And here in 202 Green Street in San Francisco, he made it a reality. As per usual, the coordinates to our little corner of the globe are here.
Today, we're tuning in to the origin story of the invention that changed everything, from politics to pop stars to those cat videos that your fun Aunt Pat forces you to watch.
Because sometimes revolutions don't just start with a bang. They start in a small room, in a small building, by someone with a huge dream.
This is Get on My Corner, the invention of television.
Almost every corner has a story. You walk past history every day without even knowing it. We are here to bring those corners to life. So go on and get on my corner.
Welcome back to Get on My Corner, where we are at the corner where it all went down.
We are lucky enough to have sitting with us the man who knows everything about this story, author, historian, and Philo Farnsworth expert, Paul Shatskin.
And Paul's book, The Boy Who Invented Television, shines a light on the real hero of the story of the creation of TV, and that was Philo Farnsworth. Welcome to Get on My Corner, Paul.
It's great to be here, guys. I haven't been to this corner for a long time, and it's nice to be back here.
Tell us a little bit about Philo Farnsworth, like who he was. We want to get to know this man.
Philo Farnsworth was born to a essentially Mormon pioneer family in the wilds of Utah in 1906. His grandfather, who bore his name 2 generations earlier, Philo Farnsworth I, migrated west with Brigham Young in the 19th century. And so Philo was born to Lewis and Serena Farnsworth in 1906 in Beaver Creek, Utah. And they lived a very hard-scrabble rural life in that part of Utah. But they had access to the Sears catalog, and that was their exposure to the larger world beyond them. And that is how this young man began to learn of the world of science and invention, and he expressed to his father at a very early age his wish that he had been born an inventor. And he showed himself to have a deep understanding and thirst for knowledge and science and all things electrical at a very early age.
Wow, that's amazing. I do want to bring it kind of full circle, back to modern day Mormon.
Wow.
That was Philo
extreme.
returning.
That
was Philo returning to the scene.
So you would say that Philo, the ghost of Philo Farnsworth, is with us right now.
With us not only the ghost of Philo Farnsworth, but the physical manifestation of his presence on the planet is here in all of the technology that we're using today.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice the cameras, but you're right.
But you didn't notice the cameras, but the people who are seeing this might be aware of the screens.
Oh,
I hope so.
yeah.
Because if they're not seeing this through screens, then we have an even more interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, maybe they're listening to it on the drive to work. Who knows?
Possibly, yes.
Yeah, and then, like some
But
of us
even
are
if they're
more
listening
attractive
to it
than-
on the drive to work, they probably have a car that has a screen in it.
That's true.
And the reason we're here is because all of the screen technology that pervades the planet now started right here almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, amazing. And I want to pull it back to around that time and just the, setting the stage for this to happen. What were some of the other folks involved in this race? Like any other inventors, companies, interests that were like jockeying to get there first?
We're talking about a time when the likelihood of television was almost a given. We're talking about a period when radio was already present, we had motion pictures, and there was a broad expectation that somehow we would find a way to merge moving pictures with radio and have moving pictures that flew through the air. So all of the big electrical companies of this era, the companies that had been formed during the first generation of invention in the 19th century, were on that path. So we're talking about AT&T, General Electric, and the big one in the game now by the 1920s is the Radio Corporation of America, or RCA. And those are the American companies. There were companies in other countries like Britain and Germany that were also on this path to try to solve this riddle of how do you merge the concept of motion pictures with the technology of radio.
Today, I want to thank our sponsor, Billy Clean. Billy Clean is a 100% natural, waterless, rinseless hand and body soap. For those that don't know, I am a first-time father to an infant baby girl that was born about a month ago, and I want to keep her safe. So my Billy Clean kills about 99% of staph and E. coli while still keeping the healthy flora in my hand. So what I do is right before I change my little girl's diaper or feed her or just handle her in general, I take a pump, put it on my hand, cover it back up, and then I rub it in. And all you have to do is rub it for about 8 to 10 seconds, and then bam, it is done, ready to go. I don't have to go to the bathroom, I don't have to rinse anything off. It just is clean, and it has been lab tested to be as clean as using soap and water, just like in the bathroom. And then I change my little girl's diaper, everything is good. I feel really confident that she is safe, that she is healthy, that she is clean, and I have done my job to be a responsible parent. So go on mybillyclean.com, type in Get On My Corner, and you get 50% off your entire purchase. So thank you, Billy Clean.
There seems to be a little bit of like drama when it comes to the invention of TV. And it seems to be a little bit of a complicated question. Can you tell us like who is credited with inventing television and why, in fact, is it kind of a complicated question to ask?
The question of who invented television has been handed down over the decades as a complicated question because of the premise that television was too complicated a technology for any single individual to have invented in the manner of Edison or Bell or Marconi, as they were individuals who came up with radical world-changing technologies. So the assumption that we have received over the decades was television was too complicated to be invented by a single individual. But the forgotten historical record is that the technology that pervades the world now of screens and cameras did in fact first surface in the mind of a 14-year-old farm boy in Rigby, Idaho in the summer of 1921, and it arrived in his mind intact. The whole system, from soup to nuts, from camera to receiver, he thought of in one fell swoop. And that concept that he had in 1921 is what he came here to 202 Green Street in 1926, and the principle that he finally proved in fact in 1927. And all of the screen technology that we enjoy today stems from that process and those moments.
So at this point, we've established that he came up with this idea all on his own, from soup to nuts, as you said. But what brought him to San Francisco from Idaho, from Utah, from all these different places?
Sure.
Why here?
Well, Farnsworth grew up in a world of little means. He did not have the means to try to build something like he had conceived. And he worried for years that he would someday see that somebody else had come up with the same idea. It seemed so obvious to him, but that didn't happen for 5 years. And in 1926, he takes a job as an office manager for a community chest campaign in Salt Lake City, Utah, where he's living. And that community chest campaign was managed by a man named George Everson, who came from the financial circles of San Francisco. And after a day's work in 1926, George asks Philo, he was using the name Phil now, he dropped the O, so he asked Phil what his plans were for the future, and Phil said, well, I have this idea that I would really like to try to work on, but I don't have the means. George asked him what it was, and while George didn't understand what he was talking about, a colleague of his who was a Stanford graduate understood what he was hearing and encouraged George to listen again. It was George who came here to his financial contacts in San Francisco and prevailed upon them to provide Farnsworth with $25,000, which was a lot of money in those days, but not as much as it would eventually take. But these capitalists associated with the Crocker Bank provided the funds and set him up in this facility here at 202 Green Street. So the reason this story happens in San Francisco is because San Francisco was where the money came from.
So it sounds like there's a lot kind of going on when it comes to the invention of television.
That's right.
If it hadn't been Philo, would it have been anybody else? Who would that have been?
Well, you're asking a very hypothetical question.
Yes.
So any answer that I offer you will be hypothetical. But from my perspective, if we went back over the historical record and removed Philo Farnsworth's patents and inventions from what we now call television, we would be left with what we call radio.
Okay, that's
a pretty good answer.
Really, wow,
Yeah.
I love that.
Because the history that unfolds from 1927 on involves a lot of patent litigation, principally between Farnsworth and the Radio Corporation of America, which was determined to own all the patents that would be necessary to make television happen. And the historical record is that RCA lost all of that patent litigation and Farnsworth won it all. And so embodied all the testimony and documents from those cases is the idea that you could make the case that if you removed Farnsworth from the equation, we don't have television today. There are elements in his patents that are so fundamental to the art of forming and scanning an electrical image that without those elements, television or video, as it's more commonly known now, would simply not exist.
How fundamental is San Francisco and that corner, this corner that we're at, to the invention of television?
San Francisco and this location at 202 Green Street in San Francisco are absolutely pivotal to what I like to describe as the arrival of video on the planet.
Okay.
The financing that made it happen all came from San Francisco. It all took place in a laboratory at this location in San Francisco. A lot of the technical help that Farnsworth needed to fabricate his tubes and his circuits came from people, for example, somebody at the glass lab at the University of California in Berkeley created his first vacuum tubes around the circuits that he built here in the lab. And he drew on Stanford. He was one of the first to draw on the engineering schools of Stanford for help in his laboratory operations. So the location here and the talent that he found here were vital to the creation of the technology that made video possible.
Now, you mentioned a forgotten historical record of Philo's involvement with all this. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what recognition did he receive in his time, aside from the patent litigation, the legal recognition. What about the cultural and the popular recognition? Was he kind of like unrecognized in his time, or what happened there?
I'll give you three answers to why we don't have a better familiarity with somebody like Philo T. Farnsworth, who made such a fundamental contribution to the culture that we live in now. The first answer is his own tendency to not look back on his own past achievements. He was a very forward-looking guy and not somebody inclined to blow his own horn, so to speak. The second is that there are numerous pretenders to the throne. There are other people who want us over the course of history to believe that they were the inventors of television. And we can talk about them or not as time allows. But the third, and maybe the most important reason, is that he was not survived by a company that could promote his legacy. Now, during his lifetime, starting in about 1928 or 29, he began to get some press coverage for the work that he was doing here. There was a headline in the San Francisco Chronicle in 1928. That is probably when his work first came to the attention of companies like RCA. And he was recognized for what he had done through the 1930s, and recognized also as a man of considerable intellect and influence. There was, I think it might have been 1939 when there was an award given to the 10 top men of 1939, and it included names like Lou Gehrig and Spencer Tracy and Philo T. Farnsworth. So he was considered in that echelon during his lifetime. But he withdrew from the further development of television after about 1939 and 40, and did go off to pursue other pursuits.
So tell us about the moment when this thing was finally ready to go live, when it was ready for prime time, when TV was ready to take over the world.
There's a spectrum of dates over which you could say television was ready for prime time. The first one that comes to mind is in the summer of 1934. Now we're 7 years from when the very first crude demonstration of a fully electronic video picture was demonstrated. But in those 7 years, it was ready for public consumption. And the first public demonstration of television was conducted by Philo Farnsworth for the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia in the summer of 1934. And there were lines that went around the block in Philadelphia to come in and see this marvel of the new world. And it's arguable that television could have found its way into the marketplace as soon as a year or two after that, had it not been for the patent litigation that was ongoing until at least 1939. So the next date that would come to mind, when was it ready for prime time, would be in April of 1939, when RCA introduces television at the RCA Pavilion at the New York World's Fair. And Sarnoff has his famous statement where he says, now we add sight to sound. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the first president to be televised, and those images are transmitted around the New York area. But in my mind, that was a publicity stunt that David Sarnoff was compelled to do because he had spent so much money trying to get around Farnsworth's patents for those 7 years that if he had not delivered something, the board of directors of RCA was ready to show him the door.
What are the impacts on social movements, on information that television has since the invention by Philo?
In broad terms, I would say that what I like again to call the arrival of video on the planet is as culturally transformative as anything that has happened since Gutenberg and the printing press. There has never been a technology that has altered human culture as pervasively and extensively as video has. It is now the dominant means of communication throughout the world. And when I was thinking about this earlier, I thought about, well, how does it compare to like the primacy of radio? Radio, audio-only radio, enjoyed dominance only for about 20 years, from about 1920 until roughly 1940 or 1945. Television has already dominated global culture since the end of World War II. So we're talking easily 80 years.
Are there specific moments in history that wouldn't have existed without television? And for example, if it had been invented 10 years later, how would the world be different?
The world is different today because it is now what Marshall McLuhan called the global village. And it has that quality because of our ability to see as well as to hear what's going on in real time around the world. The eye is the dominant medium of the brain, or as McLuhan said, the extension of the brain. And if we didn't have that now global extension of the brain, the ability to see at a distance that video gives us, we would be living in a strictly oral world. And so it would be a world more like the 1920s and 30s, where everything came to us either by print or by sound. The piece that I'd like to add to the conversation is the importance of the merger of what we're calling television with what has become the broader manifestation of video as an extension of digital technologies. One of the most pivotal points in this evolution that we're talking about takes place in, I believe, 1953, when MIT attaches a cathode ray tube to one of the very earliest computers. That is the first time that a cathode ray tube, a television, was used for the output from a computer. And that cathode ray tube that they used would not have existed in the form that it did if it had not been for what took place at this location at 202 Green Street in San Francisco in 1927. That was the precursor moment of all the video technology. And when it gets to the 1950s, and now we're beginning to build computers, and we need a way to see what the computers are telling us, and somebody says, let's add a TV screen, that would not have existed. And then if you fast forward into the 1960s and we're engaged in the space race, you look at those photos, those films of the control rooms where they were monitoring all the space flights, they are banks of CRTs. They are banks essentially of television screens. Yeah. None of that would have existed. So we never would have made it to the moon probably.
One of the things that sticks out for me is how integral San Francisco and this area is to the invention of television. Yeah. How long was this area the center for like television development and innovation, and what happened? What changed?
This area that we're sitting in here at 202 Green Street was the center of television as we've come to know it from 1926 until 1931. In 1931, Farnsworth finally obtained a patent license from the Filco Radio Corporation. Now, Filco and Philo, they are not the same. Filco is a contraction of the Philadelphia Battery Company, which then went on to make radios. But they were also aware of the race for television, so they brought Farnsworth from San Francisco to Philadelphia in 1931. What I want to say about San Francisco is that I don't think that what Farnsworth was able to do in San Francisco, he could have done anywhere but San Francisco, because the attitude here was so fundamentally different from what he encountered when he got to Philadelphia. Philadelphia was built on orthodox electrical science, and this was still the wild frontier, where somebody could take a chance on a wild idea, like a 19 or 20-year-old kid who said he could send pictures through the air out of empty bottles, which is essentially what he did. I don't think he would have gotten the reception that he got here if he had brought it to somebody on the East Coast, because they would have said, where are your credentials? Yeah. What school did you go to? Show us your PhD before we will pay any attention to you. And in fact, when he got to Philadelphia, his lab gang that he brought with him from San Francisco to Philadelphia, within the confines of the Filco lab in Philadelphia, they were considered a bunch of wild cowboys from the West. And I will tell you that only the wild cowboys from the West could have come up with what Farnsworth and his gang came up with and then brought to the East.
So it sounds like, I mean, the innovative and you know, experimental and everything spirit of San Francisco, which is still around today, is kind of what led him to make TV. So here's my question, bringing it back
let me
to
before
today.
you get to your question, let me also insert into the conversation that there's a direct connection between what happened here in 1926 and 1927 and the whole Silicon Valley arrangement.
Exactly.
Because one of the first people who came to work for Farnsworth during the 1920s was a man named Russell Varian. And Russell Varian and his brother Sig, they built the first klystron tubes that became one of the foundations of radar, and they formed a company in Palo Alto called Varian Associates, which was one of the first companies in Silicon Valley.
So I want to take it back a little bit because the things that stand out to me are Philo and television and Utah. If he were cast on The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, what would his tagline be?
Sadly, I am not familiar enough with any of the Real Housewives shows to even understand your question.
That sounds like a Philo Farnsworth answer.
You're such a Philo.
Sadly, I don't know what any of this is. I love that.
I know about the Real Housewives, but I've never watched an episode, and so I don't know what their taglines are.
Wow.
I mean, I guess his tagline would have been, Real Housewives, none of you would exist if it weren't for me.
That is brilliant. Before reality shows and reruns, before sports highlights and streaming wars, there was just one spark of an idea.
A spark from a teenager named Philo Farnsworth. And here in San Francisco, that idea became a reality and lit up the world.
Huge thanks to Paul Schatzkin for sharing Farnsworth's story with us and proving that innovation doesn't come from fame, it comes from vision.
And thank you for coming along with us, because sometimes the turning points in history are not in the spotlight, they're on the corner all around us.
And if you have a corner that we should visit, let us know. The links are in the show notes.
Keep your curiosity tuned in and get on my corner.